Good evening and welcome. This is the India Today Newstrack. I'm Rahul Kanwal. Will the cloud of Kashmir overshadow the talks between Prime Minister Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping? That's my top focus on the Newstrack tonight.
Ahead of the Mamallapuram meeting, Dragon at its devious best. Before shaking hands with Modi, Xi dares India on Kashmir. Bats for all-weather ally Pakistan and sparks a furious political war. The Congress tells Modi to tame Beijing, raise Tibet, Hong Kong and even Aksai Chin. Can Modi win this Chinese checkers?
Just hours before taking off for India, the Chinese President Xi Jinping emphasized now his relationship with Pakistan was unbreakable, unshakable. He spoke of United Nations Security Council resolutions about Jammu and Kashmir, the need to respect the UN Charter, and spoke about how on Kashmir, China sided strongly with Pakistan and spoke of safeguarding Pakistani interests. Now, all of this is completely the opposite of India would have liked to hear from the Chinese president right before his arrival in India. Now, the Congress leadership is attacking the BJP government, saying that the BJP is being weak on China, that if they're questioning us on Kashmir, India should start questioning China on pro-democracy movements in Hong Kong, on human rights violations in Xinjiang. Questions being asked of the BJP about why that's not being done. Does the Modi government need to be more aggressive when it comes to China? Have we not been aggressive enough so far? Would that work well for us? Would it be counterproductive? We'd look at the entire spectrum of relations between India and China over the next 1 hour. Geeta Mohan, our foreign affairs editor, and Gaurav Sawant file our lead story from the venue of the talks tomorrow.
Hours before the Modi-Xi informal summit in Tamil Nadu's Mamallapuram, the issue of Kashmir is sticking out like a sore thumb. What has riled India is the joint statement that followed the Imran-Xi talks in Beijing, which made a reference to Kashmir. President Xi Jinping was also reported as saying that he was closely monitoring the situation in Kashmir. Beijing also asserted that the Kashmir issue should be resolved based on the UN Charter and bilateral agreement. India has reacted strongly to the Chinese president's statement, saying India's position has been consistent and clear that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. The External Affairs Ministry stated that China is well aware of India's position and that other countries should not comment on India's internal affairs. With much publicity being given to the Modi-Xi summit, the Congress dared the Prime Minister to raise Aksai Chin with the Chinese president and the human rights abuses in Hong Kong, Xinjiang and Tibet.
When Xi Jinping said that he's watching Kashmir, why didn't the Prime Minister say that we are watching Hong Kong and how the pro-democracy protests are being muzzled very carefully? Why didn't the Prime Minister say that we are watching the human rights violations, the abuses taking place in Xinjiang? The impression which is going out today is that China is coming into this meeting in a very aggressive and a belligerent mode, and India, as usual, which has been the pattern over the last 5 years, seems to be absolutely on the defensive.
While the Wuhan summit in April 2018 took place in the backdrop of the Doklam standoff, a lot of significance is being attached to the Mamallapuram summit, and both sides are upbeat on taking ties to the next level. Will Kashmir be a dampener is the big question. With Geeta Mohan and Gaurav Sawant in Mamallapuram and Mosmi Singh in Delhi, Bureau Report, India Today.
Will the cloud of Kashmir overshadow the talks between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi? Joining us on the Newstrack showdown tonight, we've got Brahma Chalani, strategic affairs expert, Shiv Shankar Mukherjee, one of our leading diplomats. Inar Tenjin joins us for a perspective from China. He's a political affairs commentator. Amit Malviya represents the Bharatiya Janata Party. Mr. Chalani, we've seen from China some very sharp pokes just hours ahead of President Xi landing in Delhi and then onwards to Chennai Do you think the comments that have been made about United Nations resolutions, China keeping a close eye on what's happening in Jammu and Kashmir, wanting to support Pakistan, will all of this mar the talks between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi?
They won't mar the talks between Modi and Xi, but they certainly mar the atmosphere. They underscore for India the reality that China is playing the Kashmir card against India. In mid-August, when China placed the Kashmir issue on the Security Council agenda, that was a clear act aimed at India. The fact is that China occupies 1/5 of Jammu and Kashmir, and yet it tries to portray the Kashmir dispute as an India-Pakistan dispute, as if China is an outside party. And it talks about relevant UN resolutions. Those resolutions mandate that as a first step, Pakistan vacate its occupied areas. That's the first step. But China has gutted the UN resolutions by occupying 1/5 of Jammu and Kashmir. I see no reason why India should be defensive. We should, if they refer.
Amit Malviya, we've seen a lot of bluster and bravado from BJP ministers when it comes to taking back Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Very little when it comes to Aksai Chin. The Home Minister mentioned it in Parliament, but apart from that, it's all been about wanting to take POK back from Pakistan. Very quiet on Aksai Chin. Do you think these pokes by China, just hours ahead of the Chinese president's arrival, does that ruin some of the atmospherics around the big visit to Mahabalipuram?
Well, not at all, Rahul, because this is not the first meet of this kind. We've seen an informal session like this happen in Wuhan also, and I think the whole idea of these informal conversations is to talk about some of these vexing issues. Let's not forget that the border issue between India and China is not a recent one. It dates back to 1960s and the war that we fought after that. As far as Pakistan occupied Kashmir, the economic interest that China has in what is now the illegal occupation of Pakistan, India's view on all these aspects have been made very clear to the Chinese on not one occasion but on several. Recently at the United Nations Assembly, when China made a reference to Kashmir, there was a very strongly worded statement that came out of MEA, and that left nobody in any doubt. Now, this informal conversation that the Prime Minister and the Chinese Premier will have in Mahabalipuram will work towards resolving some of the issues, or at least getting each other's perspective. And I think that's a great move. And let's be very clear, Aksai Chin, just like POK, is an issue that we are concerned about, and we have made no bones about it.
Okay, I want to go across to Manish Tiwari, senior leader of the Congress party, who's joining us on this broadcast. He's put out some tweets saying, why should India not comment on the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong? Why is India not talking about the human rights violations being conducted by the Chinese on their own people, the action against Muslim minorities as well? Manish Tiwari, some would say that that would be highly provocative, and given the sensitive nature of our relationship with China, unnecessarily messing with the dragon wouldn't be a wise thing to do. Why are you suggesting that India adopt a far more hardline position than it has?
Well, first of all, Rahul, India does not have a hardline position towards China in the past 5 years. And if at all provocation is something which needs to be avoided, then the shoe cannot be only on one foot. After what President Xi Jinping said post his meeting with Prime Minister Imran Khan in Beijing could hardly be called placatory. In fact, President Xi Jinping laid it out very, very clearly that insofar as the core interests of Pakistan are concerned, China and Pakistan are absolutely one. He said that we are watching the situation in Kashmir very, very closely. So coming as it does on the cusp of a summit, I would hardly categorize them as placatory statements. And so if the Chinese have the gall to put it as straight as that, juxtaposed with what the Chinese foreign minister had said at the UN General Assembly with regard to Kashmir, it begs an obvious question that why are we approaching this meeting from a position of weakness? Why don't we tell the Chinese that we are watching the manner in which pro-democracy protests are being muzzled in Hong Kong? Why don't we tell the Chinese that we are watching the human rights excesses in Xinjiang? After all, the United States of America, which has an equally complex relationship with China, only yesterday proscribed 22 entities which are connected to the Chinese government for ostensibly participating in human rights violations in Xinjiang. Why shouldn't we tell the Chinese that we've been watching very closely the oppression in Tibet over the decades? And finally, why don't we tell the Chinese that we've been also watching very carefully the developments in the South China Sea, which have alarmed all the littoral neighbors of China. So therefore, if you are going to go into this informal summit, or howsoever you would like to label it, from a position of weakness, well, that's the choice of the NDA BJP government. Insofar as the Chinese are concerned, they've made it absolutely explicit that they are coming into this meeting from a position of aggression.
The Modi government would say, Mr. Tiwari, that they haven't approached China from a position of weakness. Look at what the Indian army did during the Doklam standoff. Even though that territory wasn't Indian, we went to Bhutan, we stood our ground, we stared the dragon in the eye, we forced him to back off. That would be the counter.
Well, that's not a justified counter, Rahul, for the simple reason, or may I call you Mr. Kanwal, if that's what you would prefer, because if you look at Doklam also from a very dispassionate perspective, the withdrawal in Doklam wasn't concurrent, it wasn't consecutive, it was sequential. It is the Indians who withdrew first in Doklam, followed by the Chinese. So therefore, whatever spin you may want to put on it for domestic consumption, as it be, but the facts on the ground remain that we withdrew first and the Chinese withdrew later. And subsequently, when the Prime Minister went to Wuhan for his informal summit, there's nothing which came out of the summit in terms of tangible deliverables aimed at or predicated at improving the Sino-Indian relationship. The fact remains that the China-Pakistan relationship, which is anchored in the bedrock of the relationship which the PLA and the Pakistani army has, continues to be the dominant Chinese relationship in South Asia. And the president of China, Xi Jinping, could not have been clearer and more explicit in the articulation that was put out yesterday. And it also begs another question. You can tick Turkey off and say that they need to exercise restraint insofar as Syria is concerned, then why are we diffident in calling a spade insofar as China is concerned?
Very important questions. I'll put them to our panel now. Manish Tiwari, thank you for joining us. Nothing came out of Wuhan. Amit Malviya, the government has nothing tangible to show for it. China has made very clear that in the subcontinent, Pakistan matters more than India does. Amit Malviya will respond to all of what Manish Tiwari said.
Well, Rahul, let's look at where we are today and where we were about 6 years ago. That journey, in a sense, defines how India's relationship with China has changed. You know, being in opposition is a privilege, and the Congress at the moment is enjoying it, as we can all see. But while they were in office and they were having these trade talks with South Asian countries and China objected to it, they let it go. So it's quite rich of them to sit in opposition and pontificate on what the government should do. The Dolam, as you rightly said, was a great flashpoint in a sense where China realized that India is a sovereign that they can't look down upon. In fact, a parliamentary committee report, which was then headed by Shashi Tharoor, a congressman, said that India's handling of the Dolam issue was exceptional. Perhaps Mr. Tiwari, who was not even a member of parliament in the last term, may not have read it. but it's available in the public domain for people to consume. The other very important departure that we have seen is that in 2012, when China spoke about the Chinese dream, and there was this South Asian region that was up for taking as far as China was concerned. Now there is a different construct called the Indo-Pacific region, where India is the anchor, and there are interests of India and other South Asian countries that are being spoken of. Now this hasn't happened because India is negotiating or talking to China from a point of weakness. How often have you seen any kind of informal conversations between Indian and the Chinese leader? They started when Prime Minister Modi took office, and that was again a big departure. And lastly, Rahul, you got to recognize the fact that India is a country that is an emerging economy. It has a long way to go. While we have common interests as far as trade are concerned, there are certain long pending vexing issues which have to be addressed. And so there are issues that we must work on together, but there are also issues that we need to talk about, and that is what is happening.
Okay,
and
Inar Tenjan, give our viewers a sense of the thinking in the Chinese mind at this time. He's poked us on Kashmir right before he takes off for India. He's indicated that Pakistan matters much more, given the close relationship between China and Pakistan. What's the message you think Xi Jinping is sending to India?
Well, I think it's very simple. He's trying to walk a balance between an old ally, Pakistan, and a vital piece of what should be the Asian century, and that is India. I don't think that partisan point scoring or blame or jingoism is going to solve the issue. At this point, you have the leaders of two countries who are talking, not throwing bombs at each other, not saying that they want to antagonize each other. They're not putting tariffs on each other. I think this is something that is very important. Both India and China are wedded to this idea of a multilateral world where countries are not put at disadvantage simply because they're not the United States or Europe. So at this point, I think everyone should be allowing these two leaders to meet, to talk. Remember, there was China was taken completely by surprise by this. Internally, you may say that is not an issue because it was discussed during the election. But China was expecting an economic package, something to address the fundamentals that India is struggling with, especially in a world which is undergoing severe economic challenges, which could lead to a recession. I think China, as Xi Jinping said in 2013, he believes that China and India will, in essence, define the next century. And I think that is what he is trying to send across, that he does not lightly dismiss people that countries that China has been friendly to, but he definitely is coming to India to talk frankly and openly with Modi about how to solve the future, not dwell on the past.
Shiv Shankar Mukherjee, are you concerned, sir, that the cloud of Kashmir could overshadow the Mahabalipuram visits, or do you believe that he's just made cursory noises to indicate to Pakistan that their concerns matter to Beijing, but when he comes here, he'll try and take the India-China relationship into the future?
Well, regardless of whether he made those noises to simply reassure Pakistan that China remains firmly on their side, and that when he comes to Mahabalipuram, he is going to do so in a much more positive state of mind as far as Indo-Chinese relations are concerned. The fact is, he has made it clear that China remains 100% on the side of Pakistan in almost every issue vis-a-vis the Indo-Pakistan relationship, the hostile relationship. And of course, as far as Kashmir is concerned, and the recent events of abrogation of Article 370 and so on, which India, of course, regards as a purely internal affair. So there is no doubt about the fact that even though this is an informal summit, even though there is no set agenda, there is one item on the agenda, whether it is stated or not, and that is the whole situation vis-a-vis Kashmir and the India, China, Pakistan triangle, particularly the Pakistan-China unity that is opposed to India. There's no doubt about that. As far as our response to that is concerned, one really doesn't know. We don't know whether that's going to be explicitly discussed between the two leaders. The problem with informal summits is that it's not transparent even after the summit. There is not going to be any press interaction or joint statement or anything, based on which we can read between the lines and figure out what exactly was discussed, whether there was any forward movement, even in a general sense. Regardless of any breakthrough, that of course is not to be expected. So I expect that, I hope that our Prime Minister makes it very clear, not in a tub-thumping, chest-thumping sense, but that as far as Kashmir is concerned, it is an internal affair, and that as far as Chinese statements at the highest level, at President Xi's level himself, are concerned, especially when he makes such comments just hours or a day before he lands up for a summit in India, that people living in glass houses should not throw stones.
Okay, that's an important point you make. I want to go across to Brahma Chalani.
That
if you're living in glass houses, don't throw stones. Both Shiv Shankar Mukherjee and Manish Tiwari raised the need to be more aggressive, telling the Chinese where they get off. Manish spoke about pro-democracy movements in Hong Kong, human rights violations in provinces like Xinjiang. Are these issues that Modi should be flinging in Xi's face, given that they're constantly poking us on Kashmir?
Well, for the first time, India is holding exercises both in Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh during the visit of a Chinese leader. In the past, we have been very deferential. We would never do something like this. Now, this is a change in Indian attitude. We should appreciate this change that is taking place. The relationship between India and China is under strain, and therefore it doesn't make sense for New Delhi to do anything provocative at this stage. But I think there's some core issues that India needs to address. Kashmir is, in fact, a minor issue. Look at trade. The trade relationship between India and China is so unbalanced. The relationship treats India as an African basket case. The Chinese only import raw materials from India and they export finished products to India. But their trade surplus with India is more than $60 billion currently on an annual basis. Now that is more than India's total defense spending. Now that trade relationship needs to be corrected. It's very important for India because at the moment, China can have its cake and eat it too. It can reap growing profits from the bilateral trade relationship with India while continuing to contain India, both through Pakistan as well as by direct means, including
point that Brahma Chalani makes. I want to show that to our viewers on a chart prepared by the India Today Data Intelligence Unit. The graph that you'll see on your screen, there it is, looks at the trade deficit between India and China. Just look at how, while it's relatively flat to start out, we were tracking data from 97 till about 2004, it's relatively flat. Then look at the manner in which the trade deficit balloons and continues to rise to 50 billion in 2016, 63 billion in 2017 and 53 billion last year. Amit Malviya, the likes of Brahma Chalani have been arguing that not just are they containing you using Kashmir, not doing our bidding at the United Nations Security Council, putting roadblock after roadblock on issues like Azhar Mahmood, we're also not giving them a tough time on trade. Look at America they're increasing tariffs, wanting to slug it out with the Chinese, whereas we've given them an open, clean invitation. They send in, they take raw material from here, send back manufactured goods. It's a form of imperialism, it's being said.
Well, Rahul, you are right that the trade deficit at the moment is quite large and that needs to be addressed, and I'm sure that will be one of the conversations that the Indian Premier will be having with the Chinese, and that's perhaps one of the more constructive dialogues to have at this point in time. Like I said, there are certain areas of common cooperation, and trade is one of them. There is also the work that is being done by the AIIB, the infrastructure bank. There are attempts to bring in synergy there. So on the economic side, there is a lot of dialogue that can be had, and some of these aberrations can be addressed. India also needs to look at its own economic prowess and look for the trade opportunities that will probably help it address this deficit that we are seeing at the moment. Some of the other issues on the border side, on other bilaterals will also be there up for discussion. But is there a room for a provocative conversation? Is it in India's interest at this point in time? The answer perhaps is that India must do what is important for India and Indians at this point in time, and sort of work towards bringing up its own economy so that it can have a more constructive dialogue with the Chinese, or for that matter other larger economies in the world, including the United States.
Inarthanjan, that clamor is rising in India, that India must raise tariffs on Chinese products, cheap Chinese imports coming in, flooding Indian markets, China importing raw materials, sending manufactured goods back to India, that this is colonialism, it's not acceptable. And like China is facing increasing tariffs with the United States, India needs to now do the same and fix the trade deficit.
If India isn't buying these goods from China, they would buy them from somewhere else because they're not available in the domestic market. So that's one issue. The second issue is, what is the end game? I mean, what does India want in the end? I think it has to do with common prosperity. They want a peace in the region. You want to have a prosperity that you can bring to people. And then finally, this issue about, who's going to thump their chest more loudly about these issues. I just don't see that as being productive. China has said repeatedly that it sees India as a key, not only market, but as a place in which common prosperity can be reached. So, all this talk about colonialism, I find very strange. If, in fact, India was being colonialized, China would be trying to import, or at least put its system of government on top of others, and that is clear.
Brahma Chalani, you want to come in on the point that Inarthanjan makes, that India needs to look at the larger picture, look at what you want from this relationship. Amit Malviya made the same point, that confrontation, aggression, not in India's larger interests. Yes, the Chinese are troubling us. They're a bit of a migraine sitting across the Himalayas, but it's not in our interest to get confrontational with them.
Confrontation with China is certainly not in India's interest. That's clear. Confrontation will only increase India's dependence on the United States, which is anything but a reliable partner of India. President Trump has clearly shown that he's, anything but reliable. He has a very transactional approach to foreign policy matters. But I want to make one important point. Your China-based guest talked about Asian century and common prosperity. The Chinese never use these terms. These terms are used by Indian leaders, the Asian century. When President Xi outlined, quote unquote, the Chinese dream, he was talking about a Chinese century, not an Asian century. China wants a multipolar world, but a unipolar Asia. They're very clear about that. That's the reason why they are trying to do everything possible to prevent Japan and India from emerging as peer rivals of China. They're not seeking a multipolar Asia. So we should be under no illusion whatsoever that they look at India as a partner. The fact is
So
that
final words from all our guests, and I'll start with Inar Tenjen. What do you expect will emerge from the Mahabalipuram talks? Brahma Chelani makes the view that China is not seeking an Asian century, they're seeking a Chinese century. That puts a country like India squarely at odds with China, and that's something that needs to be looked at very carefully when you calibrate this relationship. What do you expect will happen in this round of informal talks?
Well, I think Xi and Modi have an understanding, and that will deepen. I think that an informal process gives them the ability to talk unfettered about what their goals are and to reach some sort of consensus. I would expect that there will be some offer of economic progress for both countries. Remember, the AIIB, which was started by China, has resulted in India receiving the lion's share of loans and projects.
Okay. Amit Malviya, your expectations from the BJP's perspective? The problem, as one of our guests said, with an informal summit is you never really know what emerged, because a lot of the talks are off record. It's just directly between the principals, aides and delegates not there, so we don't know whether there was any forward movement. There's no record of it. What do you think will come of this?
Well, Rahul, I think we've got to realize that this relationship between India and China will be collaborative only to the point where it is convenient and beneficial for both the countries. Beyond that, India and China would be competing for a larger share of trade, for dominance in the region, and we will have to play it by the ear. India is very well positioned. It has moved away from being this silent player in the region to now being an assertive growing economy, and I think China realizes that. These conversations are very significant because it helps the two economies realign, two superpowers in the region to realign, and also let's not forget that India as a democracy and as a more free market economy in the long run stands to sort of dominate the region, perhaps more than a state-driven capitalist economy which is seen by the world with certain kind of deception. So all these things will be playing in the minds of the people, and India is just about beginning its journey in the region in a significant manner.
Last but not least, Brahma Chelani, your views on what you think will finally emerge. There's been a lot of talk about Quad, India, Australia, the United States, Japan coming together in a closer alliance. Lots of talk about, making it more formal, more structured, taking it to a higher level as well. What do you think will emerge when Modi and Xi meet?
Well, we talk about the Quad, that is the Australia, India, Japan, US Quad. But at the annual UN General Assembly session recently, we found a new Quad. This Quad is China, Turkey, Malaysia, and Pakistan. This is the anti-India Quad that emerged very clearly in New York. As far as Mahabalipuram is concerned, Mahabalipuram summit will be very much like the Wuhan summit in terms of its outcome. More hype than substance. Wuhan did not yield even a common statement. China and India issued separate statements, and those statements differed on key points. And in the period after Wuhan, China increased its military buildup along the Himalayan border with India. It carried out 3 separate live-fire combat exercises along the border, and it has increased its strategic footprint in Pakistan. Now, these realities, Mahabalipuram will not be able to obscure.
I'm going to leave it over there. You heard different points of view on different sides of the optimism spectrum, from highly negative to reasonably positive. We will track very carefully what emerges from these informal talks. For the time being, Brahma Chelani, Shiv Shankar Mukherjee, Inar Tenjen, Amit Malviya, Manish Tiwari for joining us on the Newstrack tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching the video. For more such news and updates, please like, share and subscribe to India Today. Also check out our other great videos from our channel. We know you would love to.